I'm Avery V. Bennett, 34 years old, and 6 months ago, my own family tried to erase me from the energy startup I built from scratch, just because I didn't play by their rules. What happened next didn't just save my company, it saved me. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family. And hit that like button if you believe women don't need permission to succeed. 3 days before Christmas, my mom called and told me not to come. Not in those words, of course. Ellen Bennett was far too polished for blunt instruments. Her voice, like always, was sugar-dipped with a soft condescension that made rejection feel like etiquette. "Sweetheart," she began, "this year's gathering will be a bit curated. Curated, like a Pinterest board. Like I was a mismatched throw pillow. I was still in my coveralls, hands greasy from replacing a circuit breaker out by the maintenance shed. The wind was howling through the mesas outside, and I had my phone wedged between my shoulder and cheek, while tightening a bolt with my left hand. "What do you mean by curated?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She hesitated, just long enough for the knot in my chest to tighten. "Well," she said slowly, "Noah is bringing his girlfriend home, Sierra. She's a designer from Boston, her family. They're a little more traditional, she's very refined. It's her first Christmas with us, and Noah wants everything to go smoothly." I stopped what I was doing. The bolt clanked to the floor. "She's a little nervous about first impressions," Mom continued. "You understand, right? Understand." Another weapon she cloaked in softness. That word was her scalpel. That was it. That was all I needed to hear. I knew that tone. I'd been hearing it since I was 10. Not angry, not cruel, just erasure dressed up as concern. I didn't argue. Didn't tell her I'd already booked my flight from Albuquerque. That I'd been saving for 3 months, juggling shifts to get time off. That I'd handmade a ceramic serving tray for her, cobalt glaze, speckled finish, her favorite. Instead, I said the only thing she would accept. "I understand." There was relief on the other end. She exhaled like I'd done her a favor, like I was the one who made things easier. I ended the call before she could decorate it with more niceties. Didn't throw the phone, didn't curse, just stood there in the utility room of the solar plant, still holding the wrench, surrounded by humming transformers and dust that never quite leaves your lungs. Funny thing is, I already knew I wasn't really part of their story. I was the footnote, the blurry background extra. But hearing it so clearly, being told that my life, my presence, was aesthetically inconvenient, that hit like a crowbar to the sternum. They didn't want me cluttering the photos, sitting at the table with calloused hands and a flannel shirt. They didn't want me reminding them that their daughter didn't marry, didn't move to the city, didn't become a lawyer or a news anchor or whatever they pictured back when they still thought I was salvageable. They wanted clean lines, Christmas lights twinkling in harmony, matching sweaters, holiday brunch, and champagne toasts. They wanted curated, and I didn't match the decor. That night, I reheated leftover chili and sat at the counter in silence. My house smelled like cedar and lemon oil. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling against the back windows. I watched the snow start to fall in slow, perfect spirals. I should have felt angry, but all I felt was empty. Like someone had set my place at the table on fire, and all I could do was watch the smoke rise. I grew up in northern Colorado, on the edge of Fort Collins, where neighborhoods were named after birds, and each home had at least 2 kinds of granite countertops. Our street, Blue Heron Lane, curled around a man-made pond that froze clean every winter. The kind of place where families put wreaths on garage lights and kept their dogs leashed, not because of rules, but because no one ever broke them. Ours was a 2-story colonial, white shutters, trimmed hedges, and a porch that my mother insisted be swept every Saturday morning, even in the snow. To the neighbors, we were the Bennetts, orderly, pleasant, dependable. The kind of family that sent out matching flannel Christmas cards and brought bundt cake to HOA meetings. But inside those walls, behind the dim glow of pendant lights and the sterile smell of lemon polish, things were more directional, controlled. My father, Frank Bennett, didn't raise children. He managed outcomes. He was the type of man who rewrote grocery lists in pen, who once ironed a wrinkled dollar bill before handing it to a cashier. He believed in planning, consistency, results. Parenting to him was just another project to execute. And to no one's surprise, his blueprint worked perfectly on Noah. Noah was born understanding the rules. He smiled when prompted, performed on cue, got straight A's without being reminded. By middle school, he was already playing violin at the city holiday concert, anchoring his soccer team, collecting leadership awards from teachers who adored how well he mimicked adulthood. He knew which fork to use. He held doors. He looked good in cardigans. My mother, Ellen, adored him for it. She called him my little diplomat. She wasn't cold, not exactly. But she moved through motherhood the way she decorated our house. Clean, tasteful, minimal emotion, plenty of polish. Her affection was measured, safe, something you earned by not making her uncomfortable. Then there was me. I was born 2 years earlier than Noah, on the first blizzard of '89. My hair was always a little too wild, my voice too loud in enclosed spaces. I liked taking things apart, clocks, remotes, my mother's blender, just to see if I could put them back together. Sometimes I could. Sometimes I couldn't. When I was 9, I built a motorized cat feeder from a broken oscillating fan and spare Lego bricks. My teacher entered it into the county science fair. I won second place. At dinner, my dad asked if it was safe to use near actual cats. My mom suggested I shouldn't get a big head. Noah, meanwhile, had just completed a papier-mâché model of the Lincoln Memorial. Everyone applauded. That's how it always went. I wasn't discouraged so much as quietly sidelined. I didn't like dresses, didn't like people touching my hair, hated glitter glue and pink pencils. I preferred wires, small motors, conductive tape. On Halloween, I went as a circuit board. Ellen nearly cried. By the time I hit 14, it was clear I wasn't going to become their version of young woman. I refused cotillion, refused violin, refused charm. I liked mud and magnets and fire. When Noah was getting invited to coding camps and leadership workshops, I was pulling parts from junkyard microwaves and teaching myself to solder using YouTube and a battery-powered iron. At 17, I applied to the Renewable Energy Tech program at Mesa State. It wasn't a glamorous school, wasn't even out of state, but it had a real hands-on curriculum, and I knew what I wanted. My mother blinked twice when I told her. Then, without missing a beat, said, "You're too smart for trade school. Have you considered applying to MIT?" Frank just asked, "Isn't that mostly for linemen?" As if linewoman would have made it better. Noah got into Stanford. That Christmas, they framed the acceptance letter. His bedroom became a shrine. My enrollment packet from Mesa sat unopened on the kitchen table for 2 weeks. During breaks, I came home smelling like solder and acetone. I offered to rewire the garage outlet after it sparked. Frank said, "Let's just call someone." So I stopped offering, but I never stopped showing up. I kept attending every birthday, every holiday, each time bringing something I made. Hand-thrown bowls, cutting boards carved from local pine, once even a solar lantern I'd designed to stay on through the longest winter nights. They smiled, they nodded, but their eyes always flicked past me toward Noah and his stories about market trends and downtown properties. At some point, I stopped trying to impress them, but I never stopped hoping I might be enough, just as I was. And maybe that's what hurt most. Not the dismissal, not the comparisons, but the fact that I had slowly, painfully come to accept that I would always be a visitor in my own family, that there would never be a seat at the table set just for me. Not unless I changed everything about who I was. And I wasn't willing to do that. Not then, not now. Christmas morning hit like a hollow bell. No echo, no warmth, just a sharp awareness of everything absent. I woke up at 6, like always, but didn't bother making the bed. The air in my house felt colder than usual, though the thermostat held steady at 68. I wandered into the kitchen, poured myself a mug of coffee, and leaned against the sink, watching the snow stack up quietly on the porch railing. There were no sounds of laughter or clinking dishes, no scent of cinnamon rolls or pine, just the low hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of wood adjusting to the cold. It wasn't silence, it was vacancy. I tried not to look at the ceramic tray still sitting on the garage workbench, wrapped in craft paper and tied with red twine, a pine clipping tucked into the knot. I'd shaped it with my own hands, glazed it 3 times until the color came out right. Cobalt with a faint ripple of smoke gray through the center. For Ellen, I hadn't touched it since the call. Now it sat like a sealed confession, daring me to admit how badly I still wanted to be wanted. By 9 a.m., I was still pacing the house, boots already on, hands twitching with the need to do something, anything, other than sit with the weight of exclusion. That's when I remembered Ruthie Delgado. She lived 6 blocks away in a mustard-colored single-story that hadn't been repainted since the Clinton administration. I'd helped her last spring when her porch lights started flickering and traced it back to a corroded circuit in the crawlspace. She'd thanked me with banana bread and a crocheted pot holder I still used. 2 nights ago, she'd left a voicemail about her garage door sticking again. I hadn't called her back, too tired, too distracted. But now it felt like an excuse to breathe. The streets were empty when I pulled up outside her house, the kind of stillness that only happens on holidays. Not just quiet, but paused. Her old Toyota sat half covered in snow, windshield wipers up like little white flags. I knocked once, then again, rubbing my gloved hands together against the wind slicing through my jacket cuffs. After a few moments, the door creaked open. Ruthie appeared in a thick flannel robe, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, slippers peeking out beneath plaid pajama pants. Her face lit up the second she saw me, the kind of smile people save for someone who surprises them in the right way. "Well, look at you," she said. "Out saving the world on Christmas." I shrugged, my voice stiff. "Figured I'd check on that garage opener. You mentioned it was stuck again." She tilted her head slightly, like she could read the whole story behind my eyes but chose not to. "Coffee's hot, banana bread's fresh. Don't argue." She stepped aside and let me in without another word. The garage opener was exactly what I expected. Frozen gear track, brittle motor housing, low battery in the remote. Nothing urgent, but enough to distract me. I moved with purpose, fixing what I could, cleaning out dust, swapping the battery with one from my bag. Ruthie sat in the folding chair near the laundry sink, talking while I worked. Stories about her late husband, Al. How he used to carve turkeys with a pocket knife. How he'd hum Bing Crosby out of tune every December until she threatened to hide the record player. After I finished the repair, I found myself lingering. I tightened the cabinet door under her sink, adjusted a drafty window in the hallway, changed out the batteries in her smoke detector, and patched a frayed wire behind her fridge with a little electrical tape. I didn't say much, and neither did she, not really. Her voice filled the space just enough to keep it from collapsing in on itself. She told me about her kids, both out of state, both too busy this year, though she insisted they meant well. She mentioned the Christmas card her daughter sent with a Starbucks gift card and no return address. I asked if she'd eaten yet. She shook her head. Didn't feel like cooking for one. I glanced at her kitchen table, 2 mismatched placemats, a bowl of clementines, an unopened box of stuffing. Everything about the house felt paused, like she'd been waiting for a reason to press play. I asked if she'd like me to stay a while. She blinked once, then nodded like I'd offered her something she didn't realize she needed. So I did. We heated up soup from her freezer, sat across from each other, and split the banana bread with our hands because neither of us felt like washing more dishes. We didn't toast, we didn't pray, we just ate, slowly, like people who'd spent too many holidays pretending. Before I left, Ruthie wrapped up a slice of homemade pumpkin pie in foil and handed it to me with both hands, like a transfer of something sacred. "In case you forget," she said. "Forget what?" I asked, caught off guard. She smiled, soft but steady. "How good home can still taste." The words landed heavier than I expected. I tucked the pie into my coat like a secret I wasn't ready to examine and stepped back into the freezing quiet of the afternoon. On the drive home, I passed by Blue Heron Lane. I didn't mean to, but my truck seemed to drift that way, like muscle memory. Their house, my old house, was aglow with warm lights. Through the frost-lined window, I caught flashes of silhouettes. Noah, Ellen, maybe Sierra. Glasses clinking, someone laughing. I didn't slow down, didn't reach for my phone, just kept driving. Back at home, I lit a fire in the stove and curled into the chair by the front window, the one with the scratch on the armrest I never bothered to sand out. The house was still and a little too cold, but I didn't mind. I peeled back the foil on Ruthie's pie and took a bite. Warm from my coat, crust a little burnt on one edge, filling spiced with clove and something vaguely floral. It wasn't the pie I grew up eating, But it was real, and that mattered more. For the first time all day, I felt full. Not just in my stomach, in my chest. Like someone had opened a door I didn't even know I needed, and left it unlocked. When people hear I'm a maintenance engineer at a solar farm in the middle of New Mexico, they assume things. That I live paycheck to paycheck. That I rent some dusty studio with flickering lights and eat beans out of cans. That I chose this life because I had no better options. But the truth is, I didn't fall into this. I built it. Every inch, every screw, every cent. It started when I was 21, fresh out of the program at Mesa State, standing in steel-toed boots with a busted laptop and 2 pairs of jeans to my name. I landed my first job as a field tech at a half-dead solar outfit south of Taos. It paid crap, had 0 benefits, and the trailer they gave me for on-site housing had a hole in the floor under the sink. But I took it. Worked double shifts. Spent nights studying grid integration manuals by flashlight when the power cut out. I kept a binder with notes on battery storage ratios, controller voltages, panel angles, all handwritten, color-coded. No one was watching, no one was impressed. But I was building something, quietly. The first year, I saved every extra cent. I didn't buy new boots when mine cracked at the heel. I patched them with duct tape and kept working. I didn't take weekends off. I took side jobs, rewiring barns, installing heaters, fixing old irrigation timers on ranches in the valley. And when I could scrape together $700, I opened a brokerage account. No fanfare. No one even knew. But that was the moment it shifted. When I started buying pieces of the world that used to ignore me. I didn't gamble. I studied. Books, blogs, late-night finance podcasts while I cleaned my tools. I stuck with boring things. Index funds, dividend stocks, solar and wind suppliers I'd worked with. I'd seen their parts, their people. I knew what they were made of. Every paycheck, I put something away. Even if it was just $20, especially when it was just $20. Because no one ever told me how powerful those little numbers become when they're consistent. And when they're stubborn, like me. At 27, I bought a house. 2-bed, 1-bath, ugly as hell. Rust-stained siding, plumbing that screamed when you flushed. A roof so warped it looked like it was sighing. The bank laughed at me. My parents asked why I didn't wait until I could afford something better. But I wasn't buying for show. I was buying for control, for silence, for space that was mine. I rebuilt it from the inside out, rewired every socket, tore out drywall, resealed windows. I laid floors with my own hands and ran conduit through the attic on 90-degree days, when the insulation burned my arms. Every dollar I didn't pay to a contractor, I put back into my portfolio. I didn't need granite counters. I needed equity, power, choice. I never talked about the money, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew what would happen if I did. The story would stop being about the work and start being about the numbers. The same people who rolled their eyes when I talked about solar inverter specs would suddenly want tips on getting started. And the ones who never visited my house would act like they'd always believed in me, like they knew. As of last month, my investment accounts passed $1.3 million. I'm not flashy. I still drive my old Ford with the dent in the passenger door. I still sharpen my own mower blades. I still wear the same thermal jacket I bought 5 years ago, patches and all. But I sleep well. I choose who I work with. And I don't owe anyone an explanation for how I got here. Sometimes I wonder if I kept it quiet out of self-protection or out of pride. But the truth is, if they couldn't respect me when I was just Avery, the girl with grease under her nails and no degree from an Ivy, then they don't deserve to know what I've built now. Not unless they ask. Not unless they're willing to see the whole picture. The cuts on my hands, the nights I didn't eat, the winters I showered in freezing water because the furnace was down and I couldn't afford a plumber. Let them think I'm the one who stayed small, the one who missed out. Let them whisper that I never quite grew up. I know better. I know what it takes to build something from nothing. I've done it. Twice. With my hands, with my mind. With no applause, no shortcuts, no help. People see me and think maintenance worker. And they're right. I maintain, I sustain. I repair what others abandon. But they miss the other part. The deeper truth. I don't just fix broken systems. I built one of my own. And it works. 5 days after Christmas, I was under the frame of an old ground mount solar array, elbow deep in freezing dirt, trying to replace a blown disconnect switch without losing feeling in my fingers. The wind was cutting through the foothills like a blade, and my jacket, patched in 3 places, wasn't helping much. I'd just gotten the locking ring off the conduit when I heard the sound of tires crunching snow in my driveway. Seconds later, a knock on the garage door, loud and quick, like someone was panicking. I stood slowly, brushing off my gloves, and opened it with one hand still wrapped around my wrench. What I saw on the other side nearly stopped my breath. Noah stood there, dressed in one of his sharp wool coats, hair slicked back like he'd just left a boardroom. He wasn't alone. Behind him, slightly off to the side, was Sierra. Tall, poised, her winter boots too clean for this street. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, or maybe something else. Noah's expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those familiar blue eyes I used to see roll when I explained battery storage ratios, were blazing. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. No hello, no preamble, just that sentence like a demand he didn't expect to be questioned. I stared at him, caught off guard. "Tell you what," he motioned toward Sierra without taking his eyes off me. "That she worked for you, that you trained her, that you practically started her career." Sierra's mouth opened slightly, her eyes darting to me and then back to him. "I didn't know you were related," she said softly. "It didn't click until last night." I leaned against the edge of my workbench, heart beginning to thud in a way I hadn't expected. I hadn't seen Sierra in nearly 5 years. She'd been 22 when she walked onto the dusty lot in Taos in a pair of designer boots, and a resume she could barely defend. The rest of the guys had laughed her off. She was smart but shaky, too careful, terrified of making mistakes, which meant she made a lot. I remembered sitting with her in the trailer after hours, both of us eating gas station sandwiches while I redrew schematics and made her practice wire splicing on scrap. "She said you taught her everything," Noah continued, stepping inside now. "That you showed her how to troubleshoot a grid-tied inverter in the middle of a lightning storm. That you vouched for her when your foreman tried to have her removed after she miswired a junction box and blew the breaker on a client site." I nodded slowly. "That happened." "She also said you paid for her hotel when she couldn't make rent that month," Sierra added, voice quieter, almost fragile now. "You never told anyone." "It wasn't anyone's business," I replied, my voice flat, controlled. "She was worth investing in." There was a long pause. I could hear the wind whistling through the gap in my garage door, the metal creaking as it flexed in the cold. Noah shifted, rubbing the back of his neck. "You've been sitting on all of this. The business, the money, the skills. And none of us knew. Why?" I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I didn't see my younger brother. I saw a stranger stunned by the idea that someone he once deemed lesser might have built something bigger than he could comprehend. "Because when I told you I got promoted, you asked if it was real engineering. When I bought this house, Mom called it a starter space. And when I said no to Thanksgiving, none of you asked why. You just assumed I didn't belong." Sierra inhaled sharply, her face flushing again, but not from the cold. "We didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know." "That's the point," I said, steady as steel. "You didn't ask." Noah looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. He opened his mouth, then closed it, fists tightening at his sides like the truth was too heavy to carry. After a beat, he stepped back toward the door. "We just thought, if we'd known." I cut him off with a single glance. Would it have changed anything? The silence that followed told me exactly what I needed to know. 3 days after Noah and Sierra appeared on my doorstep, the Bennetts made a formal visit. All 3 of them. I was resealing the solar battery housing behind my workshop when the crunch of tires on gravel snapped my focus. I glanced up and saw the familiar Navy Range Rover parked at the edge of the driveway. The doors opened in sequence, first Noah, then Ellen, then Frank, all dressed as if they were headed to a holiday brunch in Santa Fe, not trudging up the path to my half-frozen home on the edge of nowhere. Frank wore a camel coat I hadn't seen since my high school graduation. Ellen had pearls on. She held a tin of muffins like it was a treaty offering. For a moment, I wondered if they'd practiced this on the way over. Then I reminded myself not to care. They rang the bell even though the garage was open. I made them knock twice before answering. Well, I said, arms crossed. This is unexpected. Noah offered a tentative smile, one I didn't return. We were hoping to talk, all of us. I figured, I said. You brought the whole delegation. Ellen stepped forward first, thrusting the tin toward me like a prop. Your favorite? Cranberry orange. I took it without a word and placed it on the bench beside the porch railing. Didn't even check if they were warm. Frank was next to speak, and his voice had that gruff, businesslike cadence I remembered from childhood lectures. We wanted to say we're sorry, for Christmas, for not understanding everything you've built. I raised an eyebrow. Took you long enough. Noah cleared his throat and stepped slightly ahead. It's not just an apology. There's something we want to propose. Of course, I didn't even blink. Let me guess. You want something. It's not like that, Ellen said quickly, her tone too polished, too prepared. Noah pressed on. Sierra and I have been developing a prototype for modular solar kits. Lightweight, scalable, for off-grid and emergency response. Think FEMA zones, remote ranches, tribal communities. She told me you designed her original circuitry framework, the one she built her pilot grant on. She's not wrong, I replied. But that was 5 years ago. Noah stepped closer. The market's changed. There's federal money pouring into sustainable energy. Startups like this could scale fast with the right engineering and capital. We thought, maybe this is something you'd want to co-found, partner on. I laughed, short and sharp. Let me translate that. You came here for my expertise and my checkbook. Ellen flushed. Avery, no, I cut in. Let me be clear. When I was begging you to review my schematic for my inverter design, you said it was cute but not scalable. When I emailed Noah about applying for the DOE incubator, he ghosted me. Now that the same technology is suddenly viable because Sierra wears a blazer and networks on LinkedIn, I'm back in the club? Frank stepped forward stiffly. We made mistakes. I held his gaze. No, you made decisions. You decided what I was worth, socially, professionally, and you acted accordingly. Don't rewrite it now just because the return on investment looks promising. Noah ran a hand through his hair, his frustration visible now. We're trying to include you. No, I said, calm but cold. You're trying to leverage me. The silence stretched. Ellen's eyes flickered to Frank, then back to me. Can't we start over? I stared at her for a long beat. You don't get to start over like rebooting a router. You skipped my birthdays. You downplayed every success I earned. And when I stopped showing up, none of you called to ask why. You liked the version of me that didn't challenge the image you had of yourselves. Noah's voice softened. That's not true. I stepped closer. Then name one project I worked on. One. He blinked. Exactly. I reached for the tin of muffins and handed it back to Ellen. Tell Sierra I'm flattered, but I build for impact, not optics. And I don't take meetings from people who only remember my name when they need a patent. Frank exhaled through his nose. We thought maybe this could be a new chapter. I nodded. It is, just not one that includes you. Then I turned, walked back into my house, and locked the door behind me, not out of anger, but clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't begging to be seen. I was choosing not to be used. The silence after that door closed was louder than their footsteps retreating down the gravel. I stood in my kitchen, hands braced on the counter, watching their SUV reverse down the hill like nothing had happened. Like they hadn't just tried to sell me back into a family I had already outgrown. But somewhere under the sharp, surgical calm I'd built, something flickered. Not guilt, not regret, just clarity. The kind that comes when you finally realize you've spent your whole life making excuses for people who wouldn't flinch to erase you for convenience. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not out of anger, I'd already grieved that, but because something kept circling in my head. Not Sierra's pitch, not Noah's apologetic tone. It was a memory, a box, my father's storage unit. Back when I was 19, he'd made me help him pack up his old firm's records. I remembered how he panicked when I opened a manila envelope stamped Prototype, AVB. My initials. He yanked it from my hands like I'd touched fire. Outdated, he'd said. Irrelevant. I hadn't thought about it in years, but now that word sat in my mind like a lit fuse. Prototype. By morning, I was in Albuquerque with a lock cutter and a notebook. The storage facility was still there, same sun-faded signs, same front desk clerk with chain-smoking breath and a distracted nod. Unit 42B. The metal door creaked open, and the air smelled like old paper and betrayal. I dug through a maze of banker boxes, invoices, project bids, until I found it. The envelope, yellowed, sealed with that same red stamp. Inside were schematics, mine. A version of my modular battery system, drawn when I was 16. Scribbled notes in my own handwriting, and stapled to the back, a typed proposal with Frank's name as the lead inventor. For a full 60 seconds, I couldn't move. I just stood there with my own work in my hands, staring at the name of the man who'd told me I was not technical enough for engineering and too idealistic to understand business. He'd filed for patent review, using my design, and the only reason it hadn't gone through was because his company shut down before final submission. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat like a ghost. The snow had started falling again, thick and slow. I didn't turn on music, didn't call anyone. My whole body hummed with something colder than fury. Not because he tried to steal from me. I'd known for years what kind of man Frank Bennett was. What gutted me was how easily I'd tried to prove myself to him after that, knowing, somewhere in my subconscious, that he'd already decided my value only existed if he could claim credit for it. When I got home, I pulled up the USPTO site and ran a search. Nothing under AVB, but Sierra had submitted a provisional under her LLC for a scalable hybrid microgrid battery, dated last November. I clicked through and my stomach turned. The architecture wasn't just similar, it was mine. Same load balancing schema, same circuit logic I developed when I was still living in that drafty apartment off San Mateo. But the patent claim only listed her. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was theft. Calculated, professional, and personal. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the ceiling until the sun dipped below the trees. Then I stood up, walked to the fridge, and pulled out the oldest bottle of champagne I had. One I'd been saving for a someday that no longer interested me. I popped the cork, poured a glass, and toasted the only name on the original plans, mine. Because what they failed to understand, what they never bothered to ask, was that I never stopped documenting. Every sketch, every revision, every time I was dismissed and still kept building. I had proof, I had receipts. And for the first time in years, I had leverage. 3 days later, I called a meeting. Not a family dinner, not a sentimental gathering. A meeting. I picked the location carefully, a private conference room at the Hyatt downtown, overlooking the Sandia Mountains. No distractions, no nostalgia. Just glass, steel, and formality. I emailed the invite with a subject line that left no room for confusion. Proposal review, confidential. Noah responded within 15 minutes. Ellen followed an hour later. Frank didn't reply, but I knew he'd show. Men like him never turn down a chance to reassert control. They just underestimate who's holding the pen. I arrived 10 minutes early, laid out a folder in front of each seat. Inside, copies of my original blueprints, timestamps, email receipts, scanned journal entries, and one glossy document printed in bold. Notice of intellectual property claim, pending action. I didn't come to ask for an apology. I came to set terms. When the Bennetts walked in, their expressions flickered. Confusion first, then the slow tightening of understanding. Noah's smile faltered when he saw the folders. Ellen sat down slowly, adjusting her scarf with shaking fingers. Frank didn't bother pretending. He looked at the file, then at me, eyes narrowing like a man trying to read a chessboard 5 moves too late. I didn't let them speak. "I'll make this simple," I began, voice steady. "You stole from me, twice." Noah opened his mouth. "Avery." "No," I said sharply. "Don't interrupt me. You and Sierra submitted a provisional patent built directly from the circuitry I developed. And Frank? You tried to register my first system under your name when I was still in college. You told me it was irrelevant. Turns out it wasn't, just inconvenient that it came from me." Frank scoffed. "You don't understand how business works. Ideas evolve." I leaned forward. "You forged documentation and claimed authorship. That's not evolution. That's theft." Silence. Then I slid over a single-page agreement from the folder. Here's what's going to happen. You will withdraw the provisional patent application within 72 hours. You will issue a signed statement admitting the origin of the design came from me. No press, no drama. Just the truth in writing. Then, you will wire $250,000 to the following trust account. Partial damages for attempted misappropriation and emotional harm. After that, we never speak again. Ellen's face blanched. 250, Avery. We don't have that kind of liquidity. I met her eyes, unblinking. Then sell the lake house, or ask Sierra. Noah looked like he'd been punched. You don't have to do this. But I do, I said, voice cool. Because I won't spend another decade watching my work win awards in someone else's name. I won't be your technical mule while you polish your image on panels and pitch decks. And I won't pretend this family dynamic is salvageable. It's not. This is a settlement, nothing more. Frank leaned back, arms crossed. And if we don't sign? I smiled, calm as ice. Then I file a federal claim and notify your investors. I publish every timestamp, every email. I've already spoken to 2 IP lawyers. This isn't a threat, Frank. It's logistics. They stared at me like they were seeing me for the first time. And maybe they were. The daughter who once begged for attention had grown teeth. The one they underestimated now sat across from them, holding every card they thought they'd stolen. No tantrums, no tears, just leverage, clean, precise, and non-negotiable. After a long beat, Ellen reached for the pen. She signed. Noah followed, silently. Frank hesitated. But eventually, even he knew the game was over. He signed too. As they stood to leave, Ellen paused, looking like she wanted to say something soft, redemptive. But I beat her to it. This isn't personal, I said. It's precedent. Then I turned away and started packing up the folders. They left one by one, the door closing behind them with the same finality I'd once wished for in whispered prayers. Except this time. It wasn't a wish. It was a decision. Mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't cry or scream or sink into the kind of relief you'd expect after decades of quiet wars. I walked out of that Hyatt with my briefcase in one hand and a black coffee in the other, like it was any other Tuesday. Albuquerque was colder than usual, crisp wind scraping the edges of my blazer as I crossed the parking lot. But inside me, something had shifted, not like a fire being put out, but like a wire finally being clipped. The tension that had hummed beneath my ribs for half my life had gone quiet. Not healed, but quiet. That evening, I sat on the deck of my home, staring out over the pines as dusk poured like ink over the hills. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, a justification, or a seat at my table. I was done trying to win back love that was never real, trying to fix a family that saw me as an accessory to their ambition. Somewhere between those silent dinners and stolen blueprints, I had learned the difference between being loved and being useful. And now, at last, I chose neither. I chose distance, boundaries, a life shaped by my own terms. A few days later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a small velvet pouch and a note in Sierra's handwriting. You earned this. I didn't. I opened it to find a diamond pendant. The one Ellen wore every holiday, every wedding, every carefully curated family photo. For a second, I just stared at it. Then I laughed, a short, sharp breath that tasted like irony. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't apology. It was an offering, one last attempt to patch over what money and sentiment had already failed to fix. I placed it in a drawer and never looked at it again. But what stayed with me wasn't the pendant. It was something Noah said the night before the meeting. He'd come to my house unannounced, hoping to talk. I let him speak. He stood on my porch, shoulders hunched against the cold, and said, I didn't know how to defend you without losing them too. He looked smaller than I remembered, not weaker, just more human. And even though I didn't forgive him, I understood him. Sometimes the cost of loyalty is truth, and not everyone is brave enough to pay it. I wasn't angry anymore, not with him, not even with Ellen. Anger had been replaced by something sharper and cleaner, clarity. I wasn't the problem child. I wasn't broken or bitter or cold. I had simply been placed in a family that measured love and compliance and valued daughters only when they could be branded as palatable. I grew up in the margins, building things from scraps, soldering value into wire and copper because I couldn't find it in their eyes. And now I didn't need their gaze at all. I had my own blueprint, my own name on the design. A week later, I updated my patent filing, filed under A.V. Bennett, just my initials, just my claim. I submitted it electronically, alone in my office with the soft hum of servers in the background and the sun bleeding through the frosted glass. I didn't tell anyone, no post, no celebration. I just hit submit. Then I leaned back in my chair and let the silence settle in like peace. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cinematic, it just was. This was never about revenge, it was about restoration, about giving myself what no one else ever had, the permission to be whole, to be seen, without apology. And in the quiet that followed, I realized something I never expected. I didn't want their forgiveness. I didn't even need it. What I needed, I had already built, with my own hands, my own code, my own spine. What was never given, I'd finally claimed. 6 months later, I stood on a panel at the Southwest Clean Energy Conference in Santa Fe. Not as someone's assistant. Not as a supporting engineer or internal contributor. My name was on the screen, Avery V. Bennett, founder and lead architect, Grid Bloom Technologies. The ballroom was packed, rows of chairs filled with venture capitalists, climate researchers, university students, and 2 young girls sitting cross-legged on the floor by their teachers' heels. I saw myself in them, quiet, wide-eyed, waiting to believe that someone like them could own a room like this. So I started with the truth. I told them how I built my first microgrid prototype in a garage, soldering wires with hands that shook more from rejection than caffeine. I told them how my ideas were dismissed not for their merit, but for the body they came from. I spoke not in technical jargon, but in story, because behind every watt of power we generate is a woman somewhere who had to fight to be heard. The audience didn't clap politely. They rose, they stood. Because they weren't just hearing innovation, they were hearing proof. Afterward, a woman in her 60s approached me. Sun-worn skin, silver braid, calloused hands, she introduced herself as a high school science teacher from Truth or Consequences. They needed to see this, she said, nodding toward her students. They needed to see you. I didn't know how to respond. So I just said thank you, and I meant it more than I've meant most things in my life. Because the truth is, it wasn't about me anymore. It was about what comes next. I didn't invite anyone from my family to the event. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. Because healing, I've learned, isn't about dragging people to your victories. It's about arriving at them without needing witnesses. They haven't called, haven't written, and I no longer sit by the phone. The silence no longer feels like exile. It feels like space. Space I filled with my own plans, my own people, my own future. I built something they can't take credit for, something I never have to shrink inside. Some nights, when I'm walking through the lab alone, lights low, machines humming like breath, I pass by the original prototype, the one made of scrap metal and stubbornness. I don't move it. I don't upgrade it. I let it sit there, raw and unfinished. A reminder that brilliance doesn't start in boardrooms or back-padded dinners. It starts in garages, in silence, in girls who are told they don't belong and decide to stay anyway. I used to think I needed my family to validate me. Now I know legacy isn't inherited. It's built, brick by brick, wire by wire. And this blueprint, it's mine.